If you have ordered anything online recently and noticed the delivery took way longer than it should have, or if you went to the store and certain items were just not there, or if you have been paying attention to how much shipping costs have gone up on just about everything, then you need to understand what is actually behind all of it. Because truck drivers across the country are quitting right now in numbers that this industry has never seen before. And the chaos that this is creating in the supply chain, on store shelves, and in the prices you pay every day at the checkout is only going to get worse. Guys, this all comes down to one thing. Truck drivers are walking off the job by the thousands because of what they are being asked to do versus what they are actually being paid to do. And this is not a brand new story. This has been quietly building for years. But right now, in 2026, it has reached a tipping point that the industry can no longer paper over with recruiting bonuses and empty promises. The numbers are impossible to ignore at this point. At major long-haul carriers, the annual driver turnover rate is above 90%. Think about that for a second. 90%. That means for every 10 drivers a company hires, 9 of them are gone within a year. The companies are not growing. They are not adding capacity. They are running on a treadmill, constantly spending money to replace the same seats over and over because drivers are leaving as fast as they arrive. And we know how most drivers operate financially. When you factor in what they are actually being paid for all of the hours they put in, a lot of these people are not making what they should be. And the second something better comes along, or the second the math stops working, they are out the door. And honestly, who can blame them? Because the way the trucking industry pays its drivers has created a situation where a driver can work a full week and not actually know what their paycheck is going to say. Most long-haul drivers are paid per mile, not per hour, per mile. That sounds straightforward until you understand what it actually means in practice. You get to a loading dock and you wait 2 hours, 4 hours, sometimes an entire day, and you get paid nothing for that time. The clock only runs when the wheels are turning. So a driver can be on duty for 70 hours in a week, and their actual paid hours might look like 45. And they're supposed to stay in an industry where that is considered normal. And it has always been this way, guys. This is not a new problem. The trucking industry has been paying per mile and not per hour for decades. It became the standard when freight was abundant, fuel was cheap, and there were enough drivers that companies could get away with it. And the industry just never changed it. Even as fuel costs went up, even as the cost of truck ownership went up, even as the cost of living in America went up, the per-mile model stayed, and the gap between what drivers earn for all the hours they are actually on duty versus what they get paid for the miles they drive just kept getting wider. And at some point that gap becomes the reason people leave. And guys, we are at that point. So over 60,000 truck driver positions are currently sitting empty across the country right now. 60,000 trucks that are parked because there is nobody to drive them. And the American Trucking Association says that if current trends continue, that number could grow to over 80,000 by the end of this year alone. And within a decade, the industry is going to need to replace 1.2 million drivers. 1.2 million. And the pipeline to produce that kind of volume simply does not exist right now, because the people who would fill those seats are looking at what the job actually pays and what it actually demands, and they are choosing something else. And the absences, guys. The drivers who are technically still employed but are not showing up, not available, not answering, slowly fading out before they officially quit. This is not just about people formally resigning. It is about an entire workforce that is mentally and financially checked out. New drivers in particular are leaving at an alarming rate. A large number of rookies who enter long-haul trucking are gone within 120 days. 120 days. They go through the CDL training. They take the job. They do it for 3 or 4 months. See the reality of the pay versus the hours. See the time away from home. See the conditions, and they walk. And the companies cycle through replacement after replacement, burning through recruiting budgets that could have been used to just pay the people they already had. And you might think, well, what about the drivers who are sticking around and struggling? Let me paint you a picture of what some of these drivers deal with on a daily basis. There are truck drivers right now who are pulling into truck stops and checking their bank accounts and doing the math on whether they can afford to fill up the tank to complete the load. Owner-operators, guys who own their own trucks, who have a monthly truck payment that might be $2,000 or $3,000, plus insurance, plus fuel, plus maintenance, plus registration, plus the unpaid hours sitting at loading docks waiting for freight that nobody is compensating them for. And after all of that comes out, they are making less than they would at a local warehouse job with set hours and a guaranteed check every 2 weeks. So they are making the decision to park the truck, or sell it, or just stop picking up loads. And this is the part of the story that I think is genuinely criminal. Guys, these drivers are the reason goods move in this country. They are the reason the shelves at the grocery store get restocked. They are the reason medications show up at pharmacies. They are the reason construction materials arrive at job sites. Every single product that gets bought and sold in the United States at some point rides in a truck. These are not peripheral workers. They are the backbone of the physical economy. And the industry has spent decades treating them like they are replaceable, paying them for miles driven, but not for time spent waiting, cutting corners on maintenance that puts drivers in danger, and expecting 24-hour availability for what amounts to inconsistent and unpredictable income. And now the drivers are responding the only way they have real power to respond, by leaving. And you know what makes it worse? The money exists to fix this. These are not companies operating on razor-thin margins across the board. Shipping rates went up significantly in recent years. Consumer demand for faster delivery has been a consistent and growing revenue driver. The economics of moving freight are not so desperate that there is literally no room to pay drivers for the hours they are on duty rather than just the miles they drive. The decision to maintain the per-mile model is a choice. It is a choice that benefits the companies, and it comes at a direct cost to the drivers. And now those drivers are choosing to leave. If the people at the top of these companies had been watching carefully, this should not surprise anyone. And here is what makes this even more alarming. Even if conditions improve tomorrow, a significant portion of these drivers are not coming back. When someone has spent years fighting for fair pay and basic dignity and gotten nothing, and they finally make the decision to leave, that decision tends to stick. Just like we saw with other industries where workers walked out over pay and conditions. Some of them returned when companies made changes, but a lot of them did not. Because once someone has done the work of mentally separating from a job, once they have found something else, once they have gotten used to being home on weekends, the bar to return gets very high. And the demographic reality makes this worse. The average truck driver in America right now is 46 years old. This is an aging workforce, and the young people who would normally flow into an industry to replace the retiring generation are not interested in this one. Only 12% of current truck drivers are under 25. 12%. And just 6% are women, which means the industry has never successfully expanded its recruiting base to include the majority of the available workforce. The people who are leaving are not being replaced. The people who are retiring are not being replaced. And the people who would normally be entering the workforce and considering trucking as a career are looking at the conditions and looking at the pay and choosing something else. And there is another number that does not get talked about enough when people discuss the driver shortage. Since 2020, over 180,000 drivers have been permanently sidelined by the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. These are licensed drivers who are now disqualified from operating commercial vehicles, and only a fraction of them ever return to duty. So you have an industry that is losing drivers to retirement, losing drivers to burnout, losing drivers to better paying alternatives, and permanently losing tens of thousands of already trained drivers to regulatory disqualification. The pool keeps getting smaller from every direction simultaneously, and the pipeline to rebuild it is not moving fast enough to keep up with any single one of those losses, let alone all of them at the same time. And I want to break down what this actually means for you, because I do not think most people have connected the dots here. The trucking shortage is not just a trucking industry problem, it is everybody's problem. When there are not enough drivers, freight moves slower. When freight moves slower, companies run out of inventory faster. When companies run out of inventory, they raise prices on what they do have, or they charge more for shipping to prioritize their most profitable customers. And all of that cost flows downstream to you standing at the register. You are paying for this right now. Every time you order something and pay a shipping fee that is higher than it was 2 years ago, every time a product you want shows as out of stock for 2 weeks, every time a contractor quotes you a longer timeline because materials are delayed. That is the driver shortage showing up in your life. A fleet operator recently described having 7 trucks and only 4 drivers. To keep the bills paid, he was driving himself, pulling 12-hour shifts, because he could not keep anyone in the remaining seats. His trucks have monthly payments whether they are rolling or sitting still. And he is spending money constantly on recruiting and training new drivers who leave within 3 months. That is one small fleet owner. Multiply that across thousands of carriers across the country, and you start to understand why the supply chain is under the kind of pressure it is under right now. It is not one company struggling. It is a structural breakdown happening simultaneously everywhere. And this could be just a preview of what is coming, guys. Because right now the industry is managing. They are covering the gaps by paying existing drivers more overtime, by cutting less profitable routes, by relying more heavily on rail for certain loads, and by passing costs to shippers who pass costs to consumers. But the math on all of that has limits. And when the shortage reaches the projections the American Trucking Association is forecasting, when you are looking at a gap of 80,000 or 100,000 or more unfilled positions, the current workarounds stop being enough. Now let me tell you something about where these drivers are actually going when they leave. Because the narrative the trucking industry likes to push is that these are drivers who simply do not want to work hard. That is not what the data shows. These are workers who are making rational decisions. A lot of them are moving into local delivery. Amazon, UPS, FedEx, same-day delivery services. Work that pays by the hour, keeps them close to home, does not require them to own a $200,000 truck, and does not leave them sitting unpaid at a dock for half a day. Some are moving into warehouse and logistics work. Some are getting into skilled trades that pay comparably with more predictable schedules. These are not people who stopped working. These are people who stopped accepting conditions that did not make sense for their lives. And the trucking industry lost them to competitors that offered something more reasonable. That is not a workforce problem. That is a management problem. And the trucking story does not exist in isolation. It is happening inside an economy that is dividing itself in a very specific way that most people can feel but cannot quite name. Economists call it the K-shaped economy. If you picture the letter K, you have the upper arm going up and the lower arm going down. And that is literally the trajectory that two different groups of Americans are on right now. The upper arm is people who own financial assets, who are in industries that are still growing, who are insulated from the cost pressure hitting everybody else. Their investments are doing fine. Their income is rising. They are still going on vacation and spending on premium things. The lower arm is the much larger group. People who are cutting back on groceries. People who are using credit cards to cover their rent. People who are taking on buy now, pay later debt just to afford things they need, not things they want. And for these people, the math does not work. Their expenses have gone up faster than their income has, and they have been draining whatever reserves they had to stay afloat. Truck drivers are in this group, and so is a huge portion of the American workforce. And what makes the K-shape so significant is that these two groups are not just experiencing different financial outcomes. They are living in what feels like two completely different versions of the country. The people in the upper arm of that case still get to attend concerts, take trips, enjoy the experiences that make life feel like it is worth living. The people in the lower arm are not cutting back on luxury. They are cutting back on basics. They are choosing between filling up the gas tank and buying groceries. And they are watching the gap between their situation and the situation of the people at the top continue to grow with no realistic path to cross it. That is what breeds the decision to quit. Not laziness, not entitlement. A clear-eyed assessment that the current arrangement is not going to get better. The wage gap between high earners and low earners is currently at its widest point since at least 2015. Lower-income workers are seeing wage growth stall or slow down, while higher-income workers continue to see their pay rise. And the demographic getting hit the hardest is younger workers, specifically people between 22 and 27 years old. This group right now has the highest unemployment rate of any demographic in the country, and the ones who do have jobs are earning the lowest wages in the labor market. Young workers are getting hit from both sides simultaneously. Either they cannot find work, or the work they find does not pay enough to build any kind of financial cushion. Which is exactly why they look at a trucking career that requires months of training and an expensive CDL license, and then pays you per mile driven, not per hour worked, and decide it is not worth it. And the personal debt numbers tell you exactly how people are coping with all of this. Credit card debt in the United States just crossed $1.28 trillion. And delinquency rates are climbing across credit cards, auto loans, and personal loans at the same time. These are not people who made bad financial decisions. These are people who are borrowing to cover the gap between what they earn and what they need to survive. And the longer that gap persists without closing, the more fragile everything becomes. Now, you might think, what about the white-collar workers? The professionals, the tech workers, the people with degrees who thought they had a different set of options? I would point you to what is happening at Meta right now. Meta just announced plans to cut 20% of its entire workforce. As of the end of 2024, they employed around 79,000 people. That means approximately 15,000 to 16,000 people losing their jobs in a single announcement. And this is a company that is generating enormous profits. These are not survival cuts. These are strategic cuts. The company sees AI as a path to doing the same work with fewer humans, and it is moving on that as fast as it possibly can. Back in 2022, Meta cut 11,000 workers in one round, then came back just months later and cut another 10,000. Over 21,000 people eliminated in a few months. Now it is happening again. The truck driver who is quitting because the pay is not worth the sacrifice and the white-collar professional who just got laid off by an algorithm are both symptoms of the same economy. An economy that has spent decades extracting more from workers while giving back less. The truck drivers who are quitting right now stayed for years. They tried to make it work. And at some point the math just no longer supported that belief. That is not a trucking story. That is a story about where millions of Americans are right now. And everybody pays for it eventually, at the checkout counter, if nowhere else. Make sure you are subscribed. Search the Collapse Wire directly on YouTube and confirm that subscription is active. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it. I will see you in the next one.